Hi, I'm Nikki the Librarian, and welcome to the Constant Reader channel. Here we discuss reading, writing, and our embrace of book JOMO, joy of missing out. I invite you to show up for the recommendations and stay for the conversations. Let's get started. So today's episode is Booktube Newbie Tag. I'm going to answer 11 questions about what my channel is going to be all about. Question number 1, why did you start this channel? I love books. It's my professional life, it's my personality, it's one of the ways I define myself, and I love recommending books to people. I was a school librarian for a long time, and one of the best parts of my job was reader's advisory, which is a fancy library term for book recommending, among other things. And to stand in front of a English class of 25 to 30 7th graders and you talk about 5 books, and at the end when you say, okay, go get a book, and they race to go get the books that you've just talked about, knocking down chairs, trying to be the first one to get their hands on that book. It was great. I love that the power of these authors' voices were going to get heard because of something that I had said. And I miss that. I'm a public librarian now, and I do get to do book recommendations, but adults don't usually knock each other over trying to get to books. So I do miss book recommending to large groups of people. I also want to show that your reading life is a journey. It starts as a reader that maybe you don't read very much, and then you find the book that hooks you, and then you want to read variations of that book over and over again until you've exhausted the genre. There's kind of a formula, I want to say, of your quest to becoming a reader, and I want to help with that. It's great. And whether you are still looking for that first book, or whether you're somebody that reads lots of books but you don't know how to talk about books beyond, I liked it, it was good, I want to be able to help you articulate that better. And so this channel is going to be that. Which brings me to number 2. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to Booktube? Like I said earlier, it's all about the journey. And I don't see a lot of YouTubers really devoting lots of time talking about the journey or the pitfalls of the journey and things like that. And I think I can bring an interesting perspective. I'm also a little bit older, so I've been around books in the book publishing industry for a long time. So I feel like I can bring something to the table in that way. I don't talk about metrics when it comes to reading. I had to teach at a time when kids were required to read a certain level of books, so many books, so many minutes, which I don't mind the minutes part, but having to only read certain books within a certain level, tracking how many books they read a year, or how many you read in a month, or how many you plan to read in a month. I just feel like that's a lot of pressure that we put on not just kids, but ourselves. And so I don't do metrics here. I just talk about books that I really liked. And I don't talk about books that I'm going to read. I only talk about books that I read, as in the past. And I talk about book JOMO, which is something I just came up with. Embrace the book JOMO. It is the joy of missing out on the next greatest and latest that everybody's talking about. You know, there's a really great quote by Japanese author Haruki Murakami. I am butchering their name and I apologize. But the quote is, if you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you're only going to have the same thoughts as everyone else. And that's the thing about that. You want to be a unique individual. Read your own things. Don't go with the flow all the time. That's okay. And especially if you aren't planning on buying your copy of the book when it's the hottest thing, You're going to be waiting a long time for those library holds, like months and months. And sometimes those hardbacks, if you're going to buy a hardback, is expensive because not every book comes out in paperback first. What are you most excited for about this new channel? I love sharing books that have flown in under the radar. One of the interesting things that I see on Book Talk or what's everybody's talking about are books that came out like maybe 4 or 5 years ago and aren't particularly the books that I think need to have a light shined on them. So I'm really excited to add my voice to the conversation. Number 4, why do you love reading? This is a really big question for me. Well, it's a really big answer. My life and reading are intertwined. I don't know where one starts and the other stops. It's my profession. It's my hobby. It's the thing that in the past has not only provided an escape, but it has saved me. When I read a book that speaks to me, that I recognize myself in, the good parts or the bad, that's powerful. And in addition, the books that give me the opportunity to be a person that I'm stuck in this body, but with books, I can be anybody. I can live anywhere, in any time, in any circumstance. Books teach me how to be empathetic. In fact, there's a study that shows that people who read lots of novels are more empathetic than others. And that's simply because we've lived 1,000 stories. We've walked in 1,000 different bodies, and it shows. It changes our brains. It just makes us better people. And then the other thing that I love about reading, not only as books being a mirror to yourself or a window into someone else's life, is the power of somebody who wrote something, say thousands or hundreds or decades ago, and having the same thought, the same feeling about something and able to articulate it. They're speaking across time to you. That's like big magic. Number 5, what book or series got you into reading? Hands down, Beverly Cleary, the Ramona series. Ramona the Pest was my go-to book, and I'll tell you when I started reading that book in a different question. 6, what question would you ask your favorite booktubers? Okay, so like I said, my entire professional life has been with books. And there have been moments in my career where reading became a job, not a hobby, not a passion, not part of who I was. And I would like to ask, at what point do you distinguish between this is still fun and this is starting to become like a work thing? And how do you change that so that it's still something you enjoy and you're reading books that you love, not because you feel like you should? Number 7, what challenges do you think starting a BookTube channel will be the hardest to overcome? Hands down, time. I work full-time as a public librarian and I love my job, so I'm never going to quit. But I also have to take care of people in my home, and I want to do a good job. I want to be consistent, and I want to put out a quality product, because even though this is a hobby, I want to do it well. Yeah. When did you start reading? Well, that Ramona the Pest book, 1982, first grade. Can't remember the name of the teacher, but I remember Ramona the Pest. So what's that tell you? What kind of books do I like to read? I'm a pretty eclectic reader. I looked over the last 10, 15 books that I've read, and there's nonfiction, science like nature writing, as well as some sociological books. There is a thriller. There's horror, I like that. Literary fiction. fantasy, more like magic realism. One thing I'm not like 100% woohoo is high fantasy. High fantasy, for those of you that don't know, is lots of world building. Doesn't take place in our world, isn't very similar to ours. So there's lots of backstory, lots of information you need to know in order to navigate the world. I don't really like that in either fantasy or sci-fi. But if it's low fantasy, low sci-fi, I enjoy that. And then, where do I like to read? I missed one. I'm going to go back. Where do I like to read? Everywhere. If I have a book, that's where I like to read. Where do I read? I read everywhere. I read on the couch while my husband is watching TV. Sometimes I have to put earplugs in. I read in bed. I read in the car. Sometimes when my son was in track, I would read on the bleachers because he would run the last event. And track meets are really long. So I read everywhere. What does my book collection look like? This is my one bookcase. This is where I collect all of my books. And you can see that there's really hardly anything there. And there's a reason for that. I moved 6 times in the first 10 years that I was married. And my book collection just kept getting smaller and smaller because the question I asked myself was, do I really want to put this in a box and take it somewhere and unpack it? Do I want to be the steward of this book? So that whittled down a lot of books. Then during quarantine in 2020, I did it again because I accumulated more books because I wasn't really sticking to my criteria of books that I allow myself to keep, the books that I buy. If I buy a book and I choose to keep it, it has to hit one of 2 criteria. Number 1, does it provide me an easy and accessible way to escape? Sometimes life is hard and I just need to cozy up to a book and chill out and read it. And in fact, there's a particular author or a particular book that whenever my husband would see me read it, he'd say, "Are you going through something right now? Is there something we need to talk about?" So I'll keep a book if it gives me that quick escape. The other type of book I keep are books that I aspire to be, whether it's a nonfiction book or it's a character in a fictional story that I'm like, man, she's awesome. I want to be like her. I want to emulate her. So sometimes I dip back into that book and I read all the scenes with that character so that it helps me be the person that I want to be. So there it is, my 11 questions for Booktube Newbie Tag. And that's today's episode. Remember, get your books at your local public library or your independent bookstore. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. See you then. Bye.